phenomenal. I want to talk about how we create connection. I find that a lot of people want to be connected, but don't know how. They don't know how to create it, they don't know how to get it. And I'm one of those people that believes that we highly influence one another. In fact, your story was being created even before you were born. You were in your mother's womb. People were talking about you even before you got here. What, if you were going to be a boy or a girl, if you were going to maybe get your dad's nose or your mother's teeth. They were talking about where they were going to place you in their house. They were going to decorate your room. People were talking about you before you even got here. In fact, sometimes they were talking about whether they wanted you or not, which is always interesting. We don't often look to how that creates us already. And then when we come on the scene, people are talking about us. People are talking about your story as a baby. Oh, what a cute little baby. Oh, wow, she's really loud. Oh, he's very colicky. And as you grow up, you continue to live underneath these labels. Oh, don't mind her, she has ADHD. Oh, don't mind him, he's just a monkey. Oh, he's a terrible kid. Oh, don't mind her. You know, we explain the stories of people all the time. And as we grow up, those labels continue to define us. And so our story, we often think we create our own story, which is only half true. We actually create one another. And that, knowing that is so important because that means that we have a huge responsibility to create connection. And connection is one of those things that we have to come back to if we want to see mental illness end. A lot of mental illness, even genetics, think about it for a moment. Genetics are things that have been passed down through other people's stories to you. And your environment will either increase that genetic or keep it under wraps. For example, my own son. My husband and I have been married for almost 20 years. And I've worked with some of the most vulnerable youth in Canada. I used to work in East Vancouver, and I'd work with crackheads, I would work with kids on the street. I actually learned hip hop to connect with them. That's what I did, yep, and I can still get down. But I found that connecting with them was so important because they had lived underneath a story that you will only ever be this. And it always started young. It started when they were 5, hearing that they were a nuisance, hearing that there was something wrong with you. What is wrong with you? They would hear. Or you're so lazy. And they became what they were told. And a lot of them ended up on the streets because they felt like that was the only place that they could go. Their story was constantly being written throughout their life. And then what happens was when they ended up on the street, it was interesting. Because their parents would go, see, I told you. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we see it happen all the time. And so for me, I have a lot of book smarts with resilience. What creates a resilient person? Connection. Words that are spoken that are empowering. Words that make people feel like they can come alive. We often don't think about those things. We think, oh, a psychologist needs to solve all these problems because they know. And it's true. We need psychologists, we need science, we need education, but we also forget this beautiful idea that we all have in common, that we all can use our words to build people, create people, inspire people to live up to who they really are. And none of this became more true when my son was diagnosed with anxiety and depression at the young age of 6 years old. Now, my husband and I knew that there was always something that wasn't quite right with him. He was our first child, so we just thought parenting was really hard. We thought maybe we're not doing this right. Maybe we are not good parents. Because depression for my son came out as aggression. It came out as throwing things and wrecking our house. And this only increased. Now, unfortunately, I didn't know how to deal with that in my own house. I knew how to deal with youth outside of my environment, but in my own home, I found that the story that was passed down to me about you do not behave like that in our house, that's what dictated how I raised my son. So he would often hear, What's wrong with you? Why can't you? Because I was frustrated. I remember asking him to go get his shoes on. 5 times I would say it's super nice, really nice. You know, the nice mom. But by the 6th time, I am raising my voice. By the 7th time, I've got colorful language. By the 8th time, I am now resorting to name calling. Why? Because I'm a bad mom? Or because I felt powerless? And what I did not know is that I was creating this boy to think, something's wrong with me. Yeah, why can't I get it together? Why can't I get my shoes on? And so he was never understood at home. He was never understood at school with teachers, and he was really never understood by peers. And so, of course, at 8 years old, my son wants to end his life. 8 years old. And it was confusing for my husband and I because we weren't those families. We weren't the families that I was dealing with on the streets. We were a good home. We cared about our kids. We loved our kids. We've been married for so long. We have all the stability in the world. And yet here's our boy struggling with wanting to end his life. So we had to take him to the hospital. And while he was in the hospital for 3 weeks, his psychologist brought me aside and said, "So what do you do when your son is throwing these fits of rage?" I said, "Well, I send him to his room. And I tell him when he's going to be a good boy, that's when you can come out." And she said, "Oh no, you never send the hurting away from you. You bring them closer." And I have to say, at first, I didn't understand that. Because the way I was raised was I was told to suck it up. If you're sick, you should suck it up. If you're tired, you should suck it up. Oh, you're angry? Hide that. We don't want to see anger. We don't want to see sadness. We just want to see a happy little girl. So I never knew how to process emotion. So anger with my son, I did not know how to handle it. It made me feel very uncomfortable. So after 3 weeks of being in the hospital and being in crisis literally for the first 8 years of his life, I figured we're willing to try anything. We brought him home. And every time he threw a fit of rage, my husband and I would stay in the same room with him. We removed all the sharp objects and we would say, "Son, you belong here. Nothing is ever going to break our connection with you. We are in this with you. We will sit with you in your mess until you feel like you can be whole again." And we had to do that consistently for a year. Because at first my son just thought, "You just want me to comply. You just want me to behave." And I have to admit, a part of that was true. A part of me was thinking, well, this will fix my son. So that's all I wanted. I was hoping that the hospital would fix him. I was hoping that a pill would fix him. I was hoping that this new method would fix him. But the person who changed the most in that season was not my son. It was me. I was the one who had to change the most. I had to come back to this idea of being human. And things like mental illness are not those people. It's us. It's a human experience. Anxiety is a human emotion. Depression is a human emotion, and it's a signal, and it tells us that something's wrong. And for me to shut that down in my son only increased it. So one of the things that I speak on now is how do we bring the hurting closer? Because when she said that, it did something to me. Don't push him away, bring him closer. And I saw firsthand, consistently showing up for a year, what it looked like. Now my son is 12, being fully alive. The only thing that's maybe quote unquote wrong with my son now is that he's 12. That's pretty much it. And those of you with teenage parents, you can give me a little holler. He is thriving. He's doing well. He's not struggling with anxiety and depression. And when he has a moment, and that's what it is, it's a moment. We all experience moments. Moments of anxiety, moments of depression, and sometimes they are elongated. And for him, they were. But now when he has a moment, all I have to do is put my arm around him and say, "Son, I got you." And he melts and he feels surrounded and he feels like he can make it another moment. And sometimes it is a moment by moment experience that we all need. just someone to walk alongside of us. So what does it look like? What is the nitty-gritty of bringing the hurting closer? Because I'll tell you, it sounds great and it sounds like inspiring, but really there's a lot to it. And the first thing that I want to mention when it comes to bringing the hurting closer is this idea that I don't fix anybody. I have to admit, there were times when my son was little and he would react in public. In fact, I'm pretty sure he has reacted in this store at some point. And I've had to put him over my shoulder and drag him out to our car, embarrassingly putting my head down, hoping no one sees me. But I don't know how you can not see someone with a child kicking over your shoulder. I wanted his behavior to be fixed because I wanted to look better. And that's embarrassing to say, but isn't that human? I don't want to look stupid in public. I wanted someone to fix my son so that I could feel better about myself as a parent. And sometimes maybe we don't have children, but we can think about the relationships in our lives, our partner, our co-workers, our friendships. Sometimes we actually want to fix them for ourselves, to better ourselves. And yes, that is a very, it's a good thing. For example, I often spent the first 15 years of my marriage trying to fix my husband and learned the hard way that that's just not going to happen. When we try to fix people for our own benefit, it's manipulation. And it feels really yucky. And it makes them feel like they're alone in this world. And I didn't realize that. And I didn't realize that trying to fix someone for my own benefit only increases the anxiety and depression inside of them. And so that's just a real practical thing. It's not wrong to want to fix someone for your benefit. It's just something to notice. It's just something to acknowledge and say, who am I really looking out for right now? Is it me or is it them? And that gives us the opportunity to change our mind, to change our mindset and actually switch and make it for their benefit. And then our motives are where they actually want to be. Because no one woke up this morning wanting to be a jerk. Nobody did. The second thing with bringing people closer is realizing that we all struggle. I had to face an ugly truth inside of me that those people existed in my mind. I didn't realize that. And as a human being, as someone who works in compassion, someone who works in nonprofit, someone who works in the social sector, that was hurtful to admit, that I viewed people as this and that. And one thing that's been really beautiful about mental health is that it has flatlined the ghetto and suburbia. Yes, there is socioeconomic difference, but mental health unites us all because there is no such thing as those people. It's just us. And the beautiful thing about We Day, what it's doing and the message it has, is it's reminding us that we are in this together. And that if we don't connect as human beings, if we don't come together in community, things will only stay segregated. People will feel misunderstood, and this will only continue to happen in our world. So sometimes the biggest change that needs to happen in our lives and to make a difference in mental health is right here. Do I see someone with mental health as different than me? I know what it feels like to experience anxiety. I know what it feels like to experience sadness and depression and grief. Can I not identify as a human to another human? We don't have as much of a mental health issue as we do as a connection issue. We need to stop fighting for who is different and come back together and realize that as much as mental illness has been created socially, it can also be solved socially. But that means we have to get real. We have to face ourselves and we have to face one another. Another way to bring the hurting closer is to see behavior not as what we see it as, but to see it as communication. My son's anger was communication of what was going on inside. And children don't have what we have. They have a limited vocabulary. And oftentimes, behavior becomes the only way that they communicate. And I heard from a psychologist friend that even us as adults, when we look at another adult and we see a lash out, or we see something that is just impulsive, or we see something that isn't quite right, and we think they should know better, what kind of behavior is that? We forget that our minds don't think in time. And the traumas, the little traumas or big traumas that happened to us in the past, they stay with us. Just like when we were 5, just like when we were 10, just like when we were 16, it's no different. And so when an adult lashes out or an adult shows behavior that's questionable, our job is to get curious about what is being communicated. What's underneath behavior? And I've discovered that this is such an amazing tool with my son. I just got a phone call before I came here that my son decided to cut his best friend's hair in math class. I got a phone call, he was in the principal's office. So my job now, going to pick him up from school after this, is to question, what is underneath that ridiculous impulsive behavior? Instead of getting upset at the behavior itself. And wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be wonderful for all of us to be given the benefit of the doubt? For all of us to not be seen as what we're doing on the outside, but to really be truly seen for what's going on the inside? When I was in the heat of the crisis with my son, I drank myself to sleep every night, poured myself a glass of whiskey this much. All my family's in bed. I'm not hurting anybody. There it went, down my throat, just to knock myself out. Why? Because I wanted to be an alcoholic? No, because I didn't know if my situation was ever going to change. I thought this was forever. And I had some well-meaning friends during that time call me up and want to fix my drinking problem. And I wish they would have asked me why I was drinking, because that would have gotten to the heart of the matter. Oh, Connie, you feel hopeless. Let's come alongside of you. Finally, a friend sat down with me. She said, I know you're struggling. I want to get underneath why you're struggling. Welcome to humanity, Connie. I'm with you till the end. I haven't drank since. I haven't had a problem with drinking myself to sleep since. Imagine what we could do by getting underneath someone's behavior. You literally could save someone's life. You literally could save them from going to rehab. You could save them from becoming alcoholic even before it happens, just by putting down the judgment, putting down the assumption, and going, what's really happening here? You see, as human beings, we all have the same need, and that is to be understood. And when we're not understood, we become the worst versions of ourselves. But when we are understood, we actually have this beautiful opportunity to be everything we were created to be. It changes the game. Now, do you notice that these things, you do not have to have a mental health degree to do these. You do not have to be a registered psychologist. You just need to be a human that wants to connect, that wants to make a difference with mental health. The last thing I want to bring up is boundaries. You bring the hurting closer by knowing where you start and where you finish. There's some times in our life when we just can't be everything to everyone. Sometimes you can't save the world, but you can save your home. You can save whatever boundary you need for that moment. And a lot of times we're just fatigued with empathy. We hear about the problems of the world. We hear about the mental health crisis, and we want to do everything about it. Or we're in an abusive relationship and you hear someone say, bring the hurting closer. Can I say that abuse is never okay? One thing that's beautiful about relationships as an adult is you choose them. You choose your relationships. And so if you're in a toxic relationship, the best thing that you can do is bring yourself closer and leave. an abusive relationship. Now, children, I was being abused by my son. He was threatening to kill me with knives. Here's the thing, we don't choose our children. But I certainly had to put boundaries in place where I would say, son, you cannot talk to me like that. Son, you cannot hit our wall. Boundaries are important. Boundaries teach people how to treat us. And that's sometimes what people need. People need to know, I can't treat people that way. And when we allow them to, it only increases their cycle. If I wouldn't have put healthy, firm but kind boundaries up for my son, he would think that yelling and lashing out is okay. I was bringing him closer by allowing him to know that this is where the line is drawn. And it's okay to put up healthy boundaries and take back the power that you have to choose your relationships well. I believe that our mental health crisis does not have to be the way it is. I want to finish with a story I heard in January. My friend, she works at a high accounting firm, and she worked with this young gentleman who did everything right. He was the star of the show at work. He went on retreats. He was very self-aware. He did yoga. He did everything that we would check off to say he is a mentally healthy person. But he ended his life on January 1st this year, and everyone was shocked. And here's the thing, we can't assume that everyone is okay. We have to talk about these things. Here's the thing, the number one thing that you and I can do to end mental illness and the crisis that we're in and to save another life is to connect, to bring connection back to people who so desperately need it. Thank you so much.